So I'm not sure where exactly the last video left off, but what I was getting at is that even the material, what we consider the material inorganic world of atoms and molecules, um, behave in an intentional way. They desire certain outcomes more than others, and gravity is the symptom of one such desire. Um, Matter wants to compress. It wants to come together, at least on a macro scale. On other scales, it may want to repel itself. But on the largest scale, it wants to be in relationship to other matter. That's just what we call, naturalistic science. We call that a law of nature. Um, but in so doing, they haven't explained it. They've just said there is this thing that does this, and what it does, they can tell us a lot about because it's based on certain empirical measurements that is grounded in mathematical formalism. Um, so they can tell us all about how it works, but not why. And when we ask why there is gravity, which, any philosophy, I think, any metaphysics is going to have to offer an answer to the why. That's why there are metaphysics, because there are human beings who desire knowledge. That's one of the basic motivating factors of any human's existence. It may be more latent in some and more pronounced in others, but it's present in everyone. And because of that desire, that basic urge to understand, human beings can't live without metaphysics. Um, though I think, as I said in part one, Pyrrho, that metaphysics needs to be based in experience, goes without saying. And we should always be open to experiment, to the results of experience, when we're trying to construct or continually reconstruct a metaphysical system about the nature of reality. Even from your skeptical position, Pyrrho, you must make a metaphysical statement that whatever you think perception means is all that we have access to. Now, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by perception. I think, in a certain way, I may agree with you if perception means experience, phenomenological experience. But we may disagree in the sense that I think we have experiential access to our own origin, to reality itself, because our experience has a horizon. The fact that we understand that there are limits to perception, also opens the unexperienced to us, the ultimate, the noumenal, the beyond. Because we are aware of the boundary, and to be aware of the boundary between perception and reality, we must know, in some sense, what reality is. Otherwise, how do we distinguish where reality ends and perception begins? So, I'm an empiricist and I'm a realist. I think both schools of thought are saying something important, but that there is a larger um, integration where we recognize that we have physical senses that tell us about the exterior world, but that the exterior world isn't, in any sense, the source of the interior world, of the mental senses, of the imagination, of intuition, of inspiration. Um, I'm an idealist in another sense, in that I think that creativity and novelty are brought into the world through this mind which is immanent in nature, or this spirit which is immanent in matter. Because as I said in my first video, I do think that there is a direction to all of this. But I think we can recognize that direction in our experience, and that it's not merely a metaphysical claim made without evidence. The evidence will require your participation in a certain practice, certainly. I mean, every metaphysics is also methodology for, or should be a methodology for, coming to know the truths which are therein imparted. Because if you're not taking your reader with you as a philosopher when you're writing out your speculations, if you're not taking the reader with you into the worlds that you're describing, then they'll have no reference for your descriptions, and so will always fail to understand you. Which again is why philosophy, if it hopes to survive, must become poetry. It must allow reality to show itself while still being creative. You know, poetry isn't purely fantasy. It is creative. It does bring novelty into our experience of the world, but it also shows something of the world itself. It discovers as it creates. And I think that is the type of philosophy that we are all trying to realize here on YouTube. You mentioned, Pyrrho, how you think the verbal medium is essential for real philosophy, and that the philosophical tradition requires oral exchange. And I couldn't agree more with you, and I think that's part of its birth into a more poetic way of speaking and being. Philosophy can no longer be based on texts, because, you know, as postmodernists have been, and literary criticism has been so good at pointing out, the text always has a hidden context, and so its meaning will forever be variable based on, you know, your perspective, based on the context with which you, as a subject, encounter a text. So if we're ever going to return to an understanding of wisdom, or if we're ever to, through wisdom, understand the good, the true, and the beautiful, then we're going to have to become as many parts artist as scientist and logician. So I'm going to probably make a part 3 and talk about form and matter, just to get back into an explicitly metaphysical discussion about how we ought to think of the nature of reality. Because, you know, in my first video about the river, I said it was the form of riverness that remains the same, while the material, physical river itself, the actual river, the specific river, whichever specific river we may be talking about, is always changing. Because I think that you're right, in a sense, that we can talk about a specific river, because there is something that endures even amidst the changing matter of the river. So somehow the forms are immanent in the substance, in the matter. And I think when we recognize how nature is process, then this relationship between the form and the matter becomes a bit easier to understand. But I'll try to talk about why in part 3.